Franco Corelli on Dave's Gone By from Rigoletto La Donna Immobile. I can't pronounce it properly, but I know someone who certainly can, and I'm very proud and honored that I have him as my guest. He is the host of Opera Fanatic radio program. He is the founder of the Bel Canto Society, and he is on the phone with us right now, Mr. Stefan Zucker. Stefan, welcome.
Good to be here.
It's great to hear. How are you doing, Stefan? How are things?
I'm fighting a cold, so I sound weirder still than usual.
You know what? I do have to ask about that. One of the things that attracted me to your program years ago when I first started listening to Opera Fanatic was that your voice is so unusual, and I'm not even talking about your singing voice. Did you notice at a certain point that you didn't sound like other people?
Yes, I was teased about sounding strange as a child. I was self-conscious about my voice when I began to sing. However, I thought, well, my voice was simply not geared for city traffic, but for cruising at high altitudes or on the open road. I'm the world's highest tenor, according to the Guinness Book of World Records.
Mm-hmm.
One shouldn't reasonably expect me to sound like the man next door.
Well, but, I mean, when we hear most opera singers, when they talk, they seem to have a voice that isn't so different from the singing voice.
Well, I don't know. I think there are many counterexamples to that claim.
Oh, such as?
If you listen to Gigi's speaking voice, he sounds decidedly tenorial. Or if I can easily multiply examples. If you listen to Bierling, the same is true. I did a couple of shows, for example, with the tenor Ferruccio Tagliavini, and it may have struck some listeners that they were listening to two speaking voices that, if nothing else, not run-of-the-mill.
Right.
In my case, of course, the height of the voice creates problems with the brain. The higher the voice, the lower the mentality. With tenors, the voice is where the brain should be, and there's a reason for that. The tenors need resonance, and the tenor voice seeks Lebensraum.
Room to stretch,
yes.
As the Germans used to say.
Yes,
yeah.
And erodes the brain. So that is the plight of the high tenor. I can vouch for it.
You mean it eats brain cells? I mean,
well, no, it carves out. It creates an extra cavity.
Good God!
The voice just chisels away at the brain, so that the voice has more room to expand.
Oh gosh.
Yes.
Well, I wasn't even going to get into this side topic, but we'll stay here for a little bit, and then we will, of course, talk about Corelli. But at a certain point, you learned that you could sing in an operatic style. I assume that was your mother's urging, because she was a singer.
Well, I grew up in that world. Corelli was a babysitter.
Yeah, that amazing. He was your babysitter a few times.
Yeah, in June, July, August of 1951, my mother was rehearsing with him. Indeed, he stepped in when a tenor for Don Giovanni was not available, and he filled in at rehearsals. They had the same coach, a legendary man by the name of Giuseppe Bertelli, who had been the coach or accompanist for a number of prominent singers. He was linked to the...
closer to the mic, please. I'm having a little trouble picking you up.
Well, closer to the telephone.
Telephone, sorry.
There's not a lot I can do here. So when it would come her turn to rehearse, Franco would take care of me. I don't remember any of that, but he did. He died recently.
Right.
And my mother had told me about it in some detail. She, too, is dead. He discussed this on Italian radio, and very amusingly, back in 1996.
So was he sort of in a reclusive mode when you kind of brought him to American radio, or was he kind of out there in Europe and in Italy, and we just saw him as kind of being almost not forgotten, but certainly out of the public eye?
He had abandoned his career in 1976. In his words, he found his voice opaque. He thought that he was not singing as well as he had, and he thought he'd take a rest. Well, he found himself more comfortable without the pressure of singing. He was a very nervous performer, and found his career very, very stressful, and he decided he didn't want to perform further. Well, he was coaxed back into doing some returns in the early 80s. He did a couple of concerts in this country, and a TV appearance in Sweden, and some Italian appearances. But then he withdrew into his shell. Jerome Hines, the bass, scheduled some concerts, some joint recitals with the two of them in the mid-'80s. But Franco got the flu and canceled. Then in 1990, was it? Yes. I finally, after years of trying, got him to appear on Opera Fanatic, my program. And indeed, you can hear some of those shows. He ended up doing 11 of them at belcantosociety.org. If you go to the website of Belcanto Society, BELCANTO Society.org, you'll find, among others, 3 Corelli shows that can be listened to if you're willing to use the Internet as a radio.
Right. Well, I hope a lot of people are, because otherwise they can't get my show unless they live on Long Island. And you know, we're streaming right now in the same way, only we're not archived. On Stefan's website, several of these shows, and they're 3 or 4 hours long, these conversations and bits of music as well, are available at any time just by clicking and going there. So I do recommend that people do that.
Again, that's at belcantosociety.org, BELCANTO society.org.
Now, we might as well say, I mean, I think I know, but if people don't know what bel canto means, what does it mean?
That's a big question. It's used to refer to a period of Italian opera. For example, today people construe the term narrowly and refer to the Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti period from 1810 to 1843 as the bel canto period. Others, though, have extended the term backwards, or in some cases forwards. It's used to refer to the style of singing of that period, or it's used to in a more general way, to refer to Italian opera or to opera in general. Literally, the term means beautiful singing, beautiful song.
Right. And speaking of beautiful song, what was it about Corelli that you find special?
He was charismatic, exciting, virile, and yet he could be very tender. He started out admiring his predecessors, a number of them, and wanting to have the best qualities of each of several tenors. Mm-hmm. But the qualities he thought were incompatible. So his challenge was how to achieve that. Specifically, he admired the caress of Beniamino Gigli, the fortissimo of Mario del Monaco, the diminuendo of Miguel Fleta, the high notes of Giacomo Lauri Volpi, and the passion of Aureliano Pertile. Well, he at length adopted the technique used by Del Monaco. He went to Del Monaco's teacher, a man called Melocchi, and ended up with Del Monaco's fortissimo, but no caress, no diminuendo, and difficulty with high notes. He did have passion. He emulated recordings of Pertile.
And he had somewhat of a wide vibrato early on.
Yes, exactly. He didn't like his singing for that reason, because of the vibrato, and I'll come back to that in a moment. In any event, he began to experiment to modify the technique he had learned. He learned a very controversial technique that has ruined many, by Corelli's account and everyone else's, involving lowering the larynx so that at that time he sang with the larynx at the bottom of his neck. He, as a result of this technique, had a thick sound and was able to belt out some very loud notes. But this approach, he felt, limited him in expression. So he modified the technique to enable his larynx to move about. If you look at old videos or films of opera singers, you see that their larynxes don't move.
I would imagine. I didn't know anybody's larynx moved.
According to classical vocal techniques, the larynx is supposed to remain stationary. Instead, if you look at Corelli's, you see his in almost constant flux, sometimes note by note. With this approach, he was able to sing in a caressing manner. With regard to the diminuendo, the decrease in volume that he admired so in a tenor called Fleta, what happened one day was this: Franco was singing Don Carlo with the Rome Opera and ran out of gas. On a certain high A flat, he did something that he thought horrendous, and afterwards was terribly, terribly upset, in a rage with himself. To his astonishment, people came back and said, "Oh, you know that A flat, you made a beautiful effect there." Well, he listened to a tape, and by God, he'd made diminuendo on a high note, something of which he had not thought himself capable. So he analyzed what he had done until he finally perfected his diminuendo in the mid-60s. By that time, no one else was singing softly. He had felt very badly because early in his career, all the tenors were able to sing sweetly, softly, and he couldn't. By the time he was able to do that, the others weren't, and it was out of fashion. But he continued to do it nonetheless. On the subject of vibrato, singers in Italy and France and Slavic countries for many years since the 18 teens had sung with omnipresent, conspicuous, fast vibratos. Franco started out that way, but by that point, that sort of vibrato was falling out of fashion, and he decided to eliminate it, which at length he did, so that by the late 50s it was seldom in evidence. By 1959 or 60.
And that was also from moving the larynx, or did he find that was a different thing he did?
He was able to deal with that, he said, by increasing breath support.
Hmm.
So he fiddled around with the method and at length came to support his voice by constricting muscles slightly, by pulling in muscles low in the abdomen, in the pubic and pelvic region. So,
if we want to, we've been talking a lot about Corelli. I think it's time for us to hear a bit of what you're talking about. Should we do the diminuendo, or should we go spinto, or what do?
Well, maybe we should listen to him in a caressing vein with the diminuendo.
That sounds like Lucevan?
Yeah, I sent Dave a recording put out by my company, Bel Canto Society, of a live performance Corelli gave in Parma in 1967. In that performance, he used his by then celebrated diminuendo and sang with a great deal of introspection and caress, particularly in the opening measures of the aria. If Corelli were alive, he would say, "Don't stop at the end of the aria, but play a little bit beyond and listen to what happens right after the track with the aria." Do you have the track at hand?
Well, put me back on. Sorry, Stefan. We were just setting up the CD there to make sure that we're getting it ready right now.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard the last. He at Franco would request, indeed, once when I played this aria during a theater evening that we gave, he asked me to do this and was very upset when the engineer in charge failed to. He would request that we don't stop at the end of the aria, and there is a track break there, but continue beyond the end of the aria for reasons that will become apparent.
Right. I don't know if we'll be able to play that much past the end of the aria, but I think people will see what he meant. And just want to remind folks that we're listening to Stefan Zucker on Dave's Gone By, and on AM 1240 WGBB Freeport and AM 1240 WGBB.com. And now we're going to listen to Franco Corelli with, I think, the most exquisite version of A Luce Van la Stella basically ever done. Starts on track 8, Joe, and just play it right through. Franco Corelli, that's the applause following his extraordinary A Luce Van la Stella from Tosca. And that goes on, by the way. It's on the CD. It goes on for about 2.5 minutes, and they almost don't even let the opera go on. They keep saying bis, bis, which means again, encore, encore. And you almost think every other minute they're going to just get him out there and do the aria again, but then they go on with the opera.
Yes, yes.
So that is quite an extraordinary moment.
Well, there's a CD with you, I hope, of Corelli in La Gioconda, Ponchielli's La Gioconda, again a recording put out by Bel Canto Society, of which I'm president, that demonstrates his rage. Much of the repertoire he sang didn't give him the opportunity to get really angry. That was something he did a great deal off stage, however. But he...
Well, Stefan, just which CD and which track? So Joe can cue it up.
Let's see. Try disc 3. 3 short tracks, 29, 30, and 31. Together totaling just over 3 minutes.
Super. So, yes, you were saying about the anger.
Yes, but this part gave him the opportunity to become angry on stage, and you can hear that to good effect here. He sings Enzo. Enzo believes that La Gioconda has abducted the body of his girlfriend. He wants to kill La Gioconda. His girlfriend does wake up just at that moment. this is opera. She had been drugged so that she would appear dead, so that her husband would be satisfied that, in fact, she had taken poison. In any event, in this scene, Corelli works up a bit of a rage.
Excellent. Okay, so let us hear. And I'm sorry, what is the actual title of the piece?
Part of it is called O Furibonda Iena.
O Furibonda Iena. And this is from La Gioconda.
Yeah.
Okay, we've been listening to selections from La Gioconda with Franco Corelli, of course, singing. And, Stefan?
Yes, he had his larynx lowered to the maximum for most of that.
And that's just a physical thing that he does on stage, that he can physically control.
Yes. Try doing it when you speak. You'll find that you can't. It's something that one can achieve only through great practice. Many singers, myself among them, don't like the method for all kinds of reasons and don't attempt to manipulate the position of the larynx. He did. He created what he himself termed a laryngomania here in New York among aspiring singers, and deplored the results with singers with their larynxes bumping their belly buttons. What happened, he felt, was that the method was so exaggerated by most who had attempted to copy him that voices sounded aged prematurely.
Well, do you think cost him some years off his career by doing that?
That's very controversial. I'm not sure. I've certainly contemplated that idea. Would he have sung longer had he used another method? Possibly. There's a good deal of speculation among Corelliani about what caused some changes in his singing that he himself disliked in the beginning in the late 60s and going into the 70s and leading ultimately to his premature retirement, premature according to his adherents. I'm not sure whether to ascribe some of the things that happened to him to the laryngeal method or to a number of other things that were happening at the time.
Yeah.
He, for example, went to a health spa where they told him, don't sing while you're taking this inhalation. He was in wonderful voice and sang. He claimed that caused, in his words, one of his vocal cords to soften.
Mm.
And that one chord, as a result, ended up doing the work of two. But then he did a lot of wonderful singing in the wake of that. His wife always said, oh, don't listen to him when he tells you about that. That's just his hypochondria.
I want to talk a bit more about Corelli and about opera in general and about Opera Fanatic with you. I do need to take a couple of commercials here, but we will be right back with Franco Corelli Franco Corelli and, of course, Stefan Zucker on Dave's Gone By. Be right back with you. Welcome back to Dave's Gone By. I'm your host, Dave Lefkowitz, and talking very happily and proudly to Stefan Zucker, the host of Opera Fanatic radio program, which you can hear on his website, belcantosociety.org. It's also a place where you can order videos and CDs of archival opera recordings of the greats that are really not available anywhere else. If you want to tell us a little bit more about that, please do.
Well, one thing led to another in my life. I'm a tenor who developed sinusitis. I'd always had it, really. It slowly got worse across the years. I'd always had allergies, to the point that I lost my nerve as a performer, which really is what happened in part to Franco. and he's the first to say that that was a main consideration for him in retiring. What's happened to both of us for very different reasons was that we didn't know if we could deliver the goods as performers on this at that occasion. At issue for me was that I would end up singing the way I'm speaking today. It would end up sometimes hoarse, sometimes nasal, very prone to head colds. And so I thought, well, I can't count on having my voice on that occasion. I'm the thunderstorm Caruso. During a rainstorm or immediately afterwards, I've got my voice. Then, when the pollutants come back, I lose it again, which is what happened. I had my voice this morning, for example, and I've got a little cold, and that contributes to it. Anyway, the bottom line is that I found my way into the publishing magazine Opera Fanatic and putting out videos and CDs of performances of opera's greats, Corelli among them. We have a catalog of more than 400 titles. My specialties, well, pitching records. According to me, most records and tapes are off-pitch because of mechanical flaws. Records and tapes made, say, more than 30 years ago, before the invention of a particular kind of motor, so-called hysteresis synchronous motor, that was reasonably speed accurate. So that what I do is meticulously pitch older material against tone generators. I've written a number of articles, published a number of articles about the tuning pitch. A equals 440 in use in this country for more than 100 years. Was not used on the European continent until quite recently. Much higher tuning pitches having been the rule. Tuning pitches a quarter step or more higher than 440. Many of Corelli's recordings, for example, and performances were at A equals 448, a little bit more than a quarter step beyond A equals 440. Well, Anglo-Saxon record producers regiment these recordings and attempt to pitch them all at 440. I do research and try to determine the tuning pitch in use at the opera house at that time, and pitch accordingly and consistently, although I make allowances for the sharpening of pitch that occurs during performances because players begin to play sharp for a number of reasons, instruments heating up among them. So that's one thing that I'm obsessed with, and the recordings are adjusted accordingly. Another thing is that I loathe digital sound. For many years I refused to put out CDs because I couldn't stand working with digital sound on account of two things. The hardness, harshness, glare that traditional digital technology introduces, and the fact that digital sound renders soft overtones poorly, so that you lose what I term bloom from a voice. You also lose the sound of a voice decaying into space, fading out into space. Digital just chops things like that off ordinarily. Well, eventually a man in Canada by the name of Meitner, according to me, rescued digital sound by coming out with analog to digital converters that did not do these things. And as a result, we're able to, at Bel Canto Society, we're able to preserve the sound of the analog tapes and preserve sound of 78s and other old sources when we do our analog to digital transfers.
If I can break here and go to ask a question about old versus new. A lot of, I guess it's with almost every discipline, whether it be opera or theater or dance or books, there's always the generation that says, oh, in the old days things were so much better, the singers were so much more exciting, they had so much more skill and talent, the opera directors had so much more to say. Is it true, or is that just one generation always saying that things were better in the old days? I mean, how would you compare the way things are? I guess I would have to stay sort of in America, but the state of opera today as it was in the 40s and 50s, which I guess in some, or 60s, which may have been something of a golden age here.
Let me defer grappling with that question for just a moment.
Sure.
Back in the 1830s, people said we're at the peak, but look, our singers are getting older, and look who's coming after them. The younger singers don't measure up. And so people knew that in 10 years or so, when the older stars retired, that they would be replaced by singers less good. There were a lot of reasons for that. The older stars had been trained by castratos who had developed certain methods during the Napoleonic, certain vocal techniques during the Napoleonic period. Castration was suppressed, so that the old teachers and their methods fell by the wayside. There were a number of reasons why that happened, but the absence of castratos in their teachings was perhaps paramount. Also, certain trends in composition made virtuosity less important. The singers had no incentive to develop big techniques. In any event, I would maintain that technically singing has been in decline since the 1830s. With regard to the 40s and 50s, the level of singing in this country was terribly uneven. On the one hand, yes, there were great stars. On the other hand, the average performance was a pretty bland affair, and much of the singing was incompetent in the sense that the American singers in those days, for example, had very poor Italian typically, and were outsiders to Italian tradition even more than is the case today. So that on the one hand, American performances have become, well, more professional. On the other hand, you don't get the big thrilling stars now who flourished back then.
Speaking of big thrilling stars, we'll move away from Corelli for just a moment, because as long as I've got you on the phone, I might as well ask about really the most famous, the Caruso of our day, who's still kind of going semi-strong, would be Pavarotti, and have to ask you your basic opinion of him and his career.
On the one hand, I've often lambasted him for being superficial emotionally and interpretively. On the other hand, I've usually enjoyed myself thoroughly when I've gone to hear him. He communicates great joy in singing, sometimes, despite all the effort he puts into his singing. He had great brilliance of tone, squillo, S-Q-U-I-L-L-O, as the Italians call it, squillo, ring or ping, which in and of itself I find exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to put across a piece, provided it didn't require the expression of grief, heartbreak, suffering of the soul.
You didn't think he had that, what's the word you have for it that you put out there in your magazine, of that anguish that...
you may be thinking of the term fuoco sacro, or sacred fire. I wouldn't say that he really had that. Let me explain. What makes opera interpretations, singing interpretations, interesting? What is expressive singing? There are several aspects. Musical expression in the form of rubato, taking time from one note and giving it to another. Musical expression that reveals phrase shape. In much music, you get maybe one chord change in a phrase, and the vocal line at that point has a dissonance, according to me. The singer should build toward that dissonance with a crescendo. It's a small crescendo. This can be a subtle thing, but still there should be, if you will, forward motion toward that dissonance, and then he should taper away from it. One seldom gets that. So if you think of, say, Happy Birthday, with the birthday girl being April, you get Dear April, rather than Dear April, because the singers don't bring out the dissonance that is on ape. Instead, they land on the consonants that follows it. So musical expression is one aspect of expressive singing. According to me, central to musical expression is...
Sorry about that. That's just the doorbell here. Please go on. Yeah.
Is revealing the shape of the melody and responding to harmonic events such as the portatura in Happy Birthday. Beyond that, there is vocal acting, coloring the voice to express words and to express emotions. And then something that Rossini called il cantar che nell'anima si sente, singing felt in the soul singing, if you will.
Although not in the way 1960s people would consider it soul singing, of course.
Later it came to be called fuoco sacro, the sacred fire. And it's something rarely experienced, but once one has experienced it, one becomes an opera junkie. Until that point, one is apt to remain indifferent to opera, if not downright hostile to it. What does one need all that for? Once, however, it has gripped one, perhaps made one weep, one is in its thrall and returns to performance after performance and listens to recording after recording, just in case lightning strikes again.
Well, Stefan, I have time for one more question before we end the segment, because, of course, I have a whole list of questions I wish I could ask, and we will have to table them, I hope, for next time. Please say yes, that it will be a next time, because this is wonderful.
With delight.
Great.
I think you're a great interviewer, by the way.
Stefan, thank you. But my question is, since you were talking about that catharsis, that emotion, that click that you get when opera just has to be part of your life, and changes you from not even caring about it to being an opera fanatic, junkie, what was that moment for you?
My mother had fuoco sacro, and so I grew up with it. And I was always an opera fanatic, but I noticed with listeners to Opera Fanatic that once they were moved in this manner, once they were gripped by a sizzling performance, they craved more.
Well, I crave more of talking to you, and I hope and I plan to do that in the very near future. I want to remind everybody to check Stefan's website, belcantosociety.org. That's B-E-L, one L, cantosociety.org. It's where, again, you can buy CDs and videos of classic and archival opera performances. You can also hear more of Stefan, his archived shows from his years on KCR. And are you doing a couple of new ones?
Yeah, there's a recent interview with the tenor Carlo Bergonzi on the site.
Wow. So, yes, there's a lot of major stuff. Please, folks, go check it out. And we're going to go out with a little more Corelli doing Cielo e Mar on this edition, this opera fanatical edition of Dave's Gone By. I just want to thank Stefan once more. Thank you so much for a wonderful interview.
Well, thank you so much for asking searching questions.
You're very welcome.